How's it going, everybody? Here is another episode of the Lowdown Podcast with me and my brother Austin. And today we're going to be going over our very, very first mock draft. And I feel like it's what's making us an official podcast. We got our first official mock draft 1.0. Austin, how do you feel about it?
I'm super excited. I feel like a lot of our ideas with this podcast have come up with a conversation, just you and I. And you're really right about that. You're not really a sports podcast until you've done an official mock draft. And our focus really was to start this by the off season. And, we're ahead of schedule. And I've seen a lot of people starting to release their first mock draft. So we're right on cue. I do want to preface though, we have not looked at any other mock drafts. This is going to be strictly just Cam and I drafting guys. And because we've had these conversations before, and I know how talented you are when it comes to picking, and obviously, as we talked in our first episode, we're going to try to play GM. So with that, I'm going to let you have the first overall pick in the Tennessee Titans. You're on the clock. Who are you going to be picking?
Perfect. Perfect. And I'm super excited because I feel like I know exactly what the Tennessee Titans are going to do here. After hearing that they hired Mike Borgonzoni, I believe is how you pronounce his name, over from Kansas City, he talked a lot about his situation over in Kansas City and how Alex Smith was designed to be the quarterback to keep the seat warm while they draft the talented Patrick Mahomes, and how it was planned to have him sit for a year no matter how excited they got. And he said he can't pass up on generational talent. So he made it seem very much so that he's going to value generational talent over what you're supposed to do. And seeing that it's Travis Hunter and that none of these quarterbacks really have wow, like they're wowed by, I really see it being a Travis Hunter pick first overall. It just makes the most sense to me. He's made it very clear he's not going to pass up a generational talent and doesn't seem sold on any of these quarterbacks.
No, I like that pick, number one, which means at number two with the Cleveland Browns, I cannot pick Travis Hunter. He's not available. And you really are right. It is a generational talent. But what's interesting here is Kevin Stefanski and the Browns GM, Andrew Berry, have this unique position where they got just Deshaun Watson. That was their chance at a franchise quarterback. He didn't pan out, and now they have an opportunity to get one, right?
Right.
Well, they're not going to. They're going to go with offensive tackle because that offensive line has continued to be a problem for them. So Calvin Banks Jr. is going to be my pick for the Cleveland Browns. I think you really need to get that offensive line built up. I think Deshaun Watson has struggled because of the lack of the offensive line there. Of course, I do think that there are other quarterback options, whether it be free agency or later in the draft. I don't see a lot of these quarterbacks being first round talent. So I go offensive tackle here for Cleveland.
Pick number three, I think this is where we're going to see our first quarterback get taken off the board, man. I think that Shedeur Sanders in the big city, doesn't it just all make the most sense?
Yeah.
With Malik Neighbors, Giants, Brian Daboll hasn't had his guy yet. He was inherited Daniel Jones. They won that playoff game against Minnesota. And because of that, Jones got his extension, and Dayball's never had his guy. I think Shedeur Sanders will be his first guy, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun in New York. Malik Neighbors, Shedeur Sanders, Brian Dayball finally getting his guy. I think that's how it's going to break down here.
That's a really interesting pick with the Giants, and mentally, I think we all are expecting a quarterback from the New York Giants. Just didn't know Shedeur was going to fall right in their laps. So that's a really good. All right, we got New England on the clock at number four, and of course we got a new guy in town coaching, a big defensive mind. Mike Vrabel is going to be getting a big guy in the middle to really represent what that defense is all about in New England. And I think you really can't go wrong with Mason Graham. So
No, you can't. He is an elite talent, and if Vrabel has the kind of pull I expect him to have in New England, they're going to go defense with that pick. I think he's going to want a big boy. He's going to want, someone to seal up the trenches. They already have Keon White, who's a good outside player. Obviously, they got Christian Gonzalez at corner, so it'd be really hard to get another corner this early. So I like it. I like Mason Graham there. And that leads us to our next pick, which is Jacksonville. And that's them selecting Wyatt Millum from West Virginia. And we talked about this when we were selecting, predicting which coaches would go to Jacksonville. Both of us had offensive minded guys, you know, as our picks. Neither one of us said Cohen, but was on that trajectory. But we said that the biggest problem that they have is getting someone to protect a blind side of that quarterback. Cam Robinson wasn't it. His replacement wasn't it. So they had to figure something out. I think them getting a tackle here, it just makes the most sense. There's a lot of good big boys in this draft, so I think that Jacksonville's going to select one of them here.
Yeah, I think that's one area they really struggle. We talked about in our earlier podcasts about how dynamic that offense is, and you just add a couple up front. Trevor Lawrence has some time. ETN can run a little bit more, so I really like that pick of an offensive tackle. And Wyatt Millum looks good out of West Virginia too, especially when you talk about his pass blocking, and that's really what they need to be focusing on. Um, we need to switch gears to Vegas because Vegas got rid of, with the sixth overall pick, got rid of Devontae Adams early on in the season. And so now there's a really big hole at this wide receiver position. And there's a guy that's 6'5" from Arizona who's made a lot of jump in the draft stock over the past year. And that's McMillan. And he's really a medium to deep receiver. Obviously, you've already got a couple of really good weapons like Jacoby Myers, who's a faster guy, but now you want a guy that you can go deep with no matter who your quarterback is. Again, you'd think they'd be taking a quarterback right here, but Vegas is going to wait on their franchise quarterback until a later round, I think, to go with the wide receiver from Arizona for some talent for whoever that quarterback's going to be.
I agree with you there, and I think me and you have had this conversation before where we can't envision Pete Carroll getting a quarterback this early, especially when it's not, a hefty quarterback draft. He's always whenever he's in the room, he's always made boring draft picks, and then they've always exceeded expectation. The next pick, oh, beautiful. This would be so beautiful for the world of football. But it would be cornerback 6'2" out of the University of Michigan, Will Johnson, getting selected by your New York Jets. We talked about this before, and this was before Aaron Glenn even went to the Jets. It was while we were discussing our, coaching assignments. And as you were saying, if Aaron Glenn went to the Jets, I was falling in love. I was like, oh my gosh, if he gets there and goes and he has Sauce and Reed leaves and then they're sitting there and Will Johnson, this can actually happen in real life. We can have the cornerback duo of Will Johnson and Sauce Gardner with Aaron Glenn as the defensive coach. Oh, like this can happen. So, but we're gonna make it happen at least in this mock draft because it's a dream scenario.
Gosh, it's just too perfect. And that defensive line on top of those two corners, Jets could be a pretty different defense next year with that. And I really like that pick.
Yeah, me too.
So how about we go to number 8 in Carolina? Dave Canales is still there. He's got an opportunity to ramp up this defense. There's a name that's still out there, probably has many near the top of their draft board, and that's Abdul Carter, a pass rusher from Penn State. Don't have a lot of pass rush since Brian Burns left. This is an opportunity for them to revamp that rush defense. Having Abdul Carter being drafted to the Panthers, I think, is certainly the move.
I like that. I think they go defense there as well. Abdul Carter, Carolina being able to get him at 8 too. It's weird if it would have happened, but I mean, seeing how the way the board falls down, I mean, it's actually not that weird.
Yeah, and he's probably easily the best pass rusher in this draft. So for him to fall to number 8, really falling into their laps, and if they don't get him, it would be crazy. So putting on our GM hats, we say yes.
And if they don't get him right after, I know the next edge rusher on the board is going to be James Pearson. I have him back-to-back edge rushers getting taken off the board. This time, the New Orleans Saints are going to be selecting James Pierce, 6'5", 243 pounds, only 21 years old. He brings a force just off the edge. Their defense is aging out. We've talked about this multiple times with that Saints defense, and that's probably why they still have not got a head coach because they're dealing with the Carr cap situation, and their defense is aging out. I think they got to fill in that hole and just bring in the best edge rusher available, and that is in this spot, James Pierce Jr.
Two really good ones falling back to back and being drafted back to back. This is an interesting pick because it could go multiple ways now that Ben Johnson is the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. Immediately, you think
We know how it's gonna. We don't want this to happen, but we know.
offensive line because he came from Detroit, right? Well, I think there's one thing that we know that Detroit did, and they took a running back very early, and they've got DeAndre Swift, an older guy. They could use some fresh blood. It does look like Ashton Genty will be the one going to the Chicago Bears. The speedster, he needs to work on his blocking a little bit, but if you can get this man out in space, he is going to take it home. Screen game, I think, is going to be very effective. Some of those inside zones, Ashton Genty going to the Chicago Bears to increase the potential for that already young, in some aspects, and dynamic offense.
Dude, it's just terrifying, honestly, as a Minnesota fan. Um, Ben Johnson is a fantastic play caller. Already got some weapons over there in Chicago, pending free agency and what happens. But with his mind, I know he'll get it right over there. And just Caleb Williams and Ashton Genty in the same backfield is terrifying. But it very well looks like it could happen that way. And then just doing what he's been doing with what he's kind of doing with Montgomery and Gibbs, he could kind of use a Genty and Swift 1-2 punch in there in Chicago, and that's terrifying to think about the amount of options they could have in that backfield. But what a hell of a pick that would be for Chicago.
All right, how about San Francisco? They're on the clock.
Now that San Francisco is on the clock, we're going to be taking your guy. I know you like this guy, Jahdae Barron out of Texas. He's been kind of moving up the boards as of late, at least in our heads, in our boards. I don't know if he has nationally, but just the kind of physicality he brings, the range he can cover the field. He just seems like he just seems like a 49er, one of those dynamic defensive backs. They love drafting them. They love taking them that can play inside, deep. It just makes the most sense for him to go to this team, and I think he could have a successful career there in San Francisco.
They're getting a little older, San Francisco's defense, so I really like that pick.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the Dallas Cowboys. Where are they going to go? Their defense struggled a lot last year. So did their offense. But no worries. Their offense, I think, is going to have a resurgent year. And I think their defense is too. It's going to get some help from a big guy in the middle. I've got Dallas getting Ole Miss defensive tackle, Walter Nolan, big man up front to help really increase that pressure. Interior, maybe get some double teams on Micah Parsons will allow for him to come up the middle and create increasing pressure on the defense. Honestly, there were so many injuries to that defense last year. It's a wonder they did so poorly. You get Diggs back, in the corner spot. I think this is an opportunity for Dallas to kind of step up and become that elite defense they were just a few years ago.
Yeah, and their big man might be leaving this offseason too. He's on the last year of his contract, and with them just paying Dak and just paying CD, I don't think that they'll have the kind of money to retain him, especially Micah Parsons. He's going to want some money soon too. So I think it makes the most sense to fill that hole in the draft. Nolan is an excellent player, and him going from Ole Miss to Texas, it just seems perfect. It seems like a
Yeah.
good marriage between the player and the team. And next, we're keeping a South man in the South. We're having Jalen Walker taking a short trip from Georgia to Miami. We know they need help on defense, and they're losing more and more players. They might lose Javon Holland this offseason. They lost Van Ginkel, Christian Wilkins last year. They're already, thinning out. I think they're going to re-amplify it this offseason and in this draft. And Jalen Walker is such a dynamic linebacker. He's rangy, athletic. He can cover the field. He's sure tackler as well. I think them getting someone like of his talents right here, I think that's the perfect fit.
No, I really like that. They do need some help in the linebacker spot after losing Van Ginkel. So this is a really good pick for Miami. And we're going to continue on that defensive trend with Indianapolis picking 14. And we've got Nick Emanwari, safety from South Carolina. He is probably one of the better tackling safeties you've got out there. So I really like that about him. And he has a really good coverage corner, too. I would compare him to a Brian Branch. He's a hard hitter. He's not afraid to make the tackle, and he's very good in coverage. And the Colts could use some help in the secondary. And with a defender this good still available at around 14, he's a mid first round pick grade. I think this is a great value pick for Indianapolis 14.
Yeah, I like that. I like Eamon out of South Carolina. I liked watching a lot of South Carolina,
Yeah,
games this year. They're an explosive young team. They're fun to watch. Um, and then maybe the even more complicated name, Princely Ewan Milan. I have him getting drafted right after to Atlanta. He's from Ole Miss, who is just playing right next to Walter Nolan, who we talked about. Um, but we know for the last couple of years, outside of the Kirk Cousins problems, Atlanta's biggest problems has been that defense and the edge. We finally seen them make a move to get Matthew Judon this year, but it almost seems like it's not the same Matthew Judon we've been seeing in the past. I still think he has juice in the tank, personally, but even if he stays in Atlanta, they still need help. They still need help defensively. They still need help in that front seven. I'd like their cornerback situation, AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates back there. I don't think they're going to use a first round pick on a DB. So I think to shore up that D line makes the most sense for me right there with Atlanta.
Yeah, he's a very good pass rusher. He does struggle with kind of that run defense, but he's just a natural pass rusher, and so I do think he's just going to add some real good value on the edge. All
He
right,
just needs to find a good coach that will help him be a king. That's
yeah,
all.
hey, Prince to King, I like that. I like that.
uh,
All right, so number 16. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of there. 16, we've got the Arizona Cardinals, and I really love their offense. Kyler Murray has his ups and downs, but he's got weapons. Of course, Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride is coming into his own. He's becoming a great young tight end. But I do think they struggle a lot with the offensive line and giving Kyler Murray protection. So we're going to go with LSU's offensive tackle, Will Campbell, who's a really good pass blocker. And I think that's exactly what Arizona needs to really solidify that offensive line. And that starts with an offensive tackle like Will Campbell from LSU. That'll give Kyler Murray a bit more time in the pocket. He is a dual threat quarterback. He still can run. And having Marvin Harrison Jr. in his second year, continuing to make leaps and bounds, and of course, Trey McBride, as I touched on earlier, I really do think they have weapons to be a threat in the NFC West. That's a tough division. Kind of one you never know what you're going to get. The Rams are always doing well. Of course, you got the Niners. The Seahawks are sticking around, and Arizona Cardinals as well.
Maybe, dude. That division. Me and you, we were having a conversation just talking about this, about I was like, I don't know. I really kind of like that NFC West, you know. I'm a huge Rams fan. I just like what Stafford does. I like McVay. I think they run an excellent, style of offense, good coaching, good drafting. 49ers are always interesting. But then the Cardinals were sneaky and they were in first place a little bit this year. So I'm interested to see it.
Yeah, good stuff. And that's going to be pretty much it for this first half of the mock draft episode. That's right. We've got a two-part episode for you. We got through the first 16 picks, and there were some surprises out there. But I think the bottom line is we were just addressing those team needs. We did not look at any mock drafts before. We had some crazy picks like Travis Hunter going first overall. Shedeur Sanders going to the Giants at 3. But I know you wanted to touch on one guy, one more that went to the New York Jets. You just really, really, really like that pick a lot.
I don't know if I masked myself very well when I was making that pick, that how excited I am about it. But it it is just you see how Aaron Glenn was trying to run his defense. And he's like, okay, if I had two excellent man corners out here that I could do this with the front seven, different zone schemes, you already have I'm going to say the second best corner in football. I still got to give first to Pat Surtain. I think Pat Surtain is the best corner. But you have the, top three best corner in the league. And Will Johnson is one of the best corners I've ever seen in college football. And both can play man. Excellent. You pair those two together, and you have the Williams brothers inside that front seven. Jets have always had a pretty good front seven.
Mhm.
It just, I, if that is your blueprint for your defense, this defense is going to be scary for years to come. So that's the pick I like the most out of this top 16.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a different Jets defense next year. I want to talk about Jedi Barron again. We talked a little bit about it when you drafted him to San Francisco, but I actually would argue that he's just about as good as Will Johnson. I think he coverage wise can match Will Johnson. And I think San Francisco, we saw it multiple times this year where their defense had trouble stopping teams. If, for example, the Green Bay Packers, who were lackluster toward the end of the year. So they really could use a guy who's really good at man-to-man coverage. I think you and I have something about defense. We like defense.
Like defense, and we love the trenches too.
Yeah, so I really like that pick. Of course, James Pierce Jr. going to New Orleans was crazy. Ashton Jeanty to Chicago. Oh, that's going to be scary if that comes to fruition. And Will Campbell out of LSU going to Arizona to secure that offensive line. And then the next.
And how about the name not selected?
There's quite a few.
Well, there's the big one.
Cam Ward, quarterback, Miami.
Yeah. A lot of people are saying top 3 for Cam Ward, not us. I don't see it. I don't see it.
Well, I can tell you in our next episode, we're going to be going through picks 17 through 32. A couple of places that need quarterbacks, Seattle being one of those, Pittsburgh at pick 21. We're going to see what they do. And then, of course, the playoff teams, Houston, Detroit, Philadelphia, Kansas City. Of course, Philadelphia and Kansas City's an estimation on what happens in the big game in a couple weeks. I've got Kansas City at pick number 32. Does that say something? So we'll have the rest of those picks next time. But please leave a comment. Let us know what you think of our mock draft, the first half, and who you want to see picked in the second half of our mock draft. Any last thoughts, Cam?
No, I'm just excited to get to part 2.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us. Remember, like, subscribe. We love the thumbs up, and give us good or bad comments. We'll take anything. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok too. That's Low Down Podcast. We'll see you next time.
See you guys next time.